Okay, welcome everyone to Module 3, and in this lesson I'm going to be introducing you to how to read sheet music. This is going to be one of the most pivotal lessons that you're going to have in this entire course because reading sheet music is what's going to allow you to apply your piano techniques, read any kind of song that you would ever want to learn, and be actually able to understand and play it. It's important that you focus and even take notes during this lesson because it doesn't have to be anything grand, just something brief so that you can, look at it and understand what you're reading. It's worth mentioning that there are other techniques out there to be able to read sheet music, but what I'm going to be teaching you is the most reliable, tried and tested method that exists. This is the fastest way to read music. There are even people who create their own methods, like completely ignoring sheet music and just making their own variations of being able to read music. But the problem is, although it might be a clever way of doing it, music doesn't actually exist. People don't write music that way. This is how music is written. So here you can see we have 5 lines here. We also have 4 spaces. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces and 5 lines. Now, this shape here is called the stave, and this is where music is notated so that you can read it. Now you have something that's called a clef. This is going to be the treble clef. The treble clef tells us which pitch range in the piano that this section here is symbolizing. What I mean by that is that, first of all, this stave here, the higher you go, the more to the right and upwards you go on the piano. And the lower you go, the more down and left you go on the piano. So this symbol here is the treble clef. I'll write it. It's indicating a particular part of the piano, but we'll have more on that later. The treble clef, in general terms, means you play with your right hand. Now, you actually have another kind of clef for your left hand, but again, we'll do that in a second. Well, how do we actually read this? So, as I mentioned, you have 5 lines and 4 spaces. Each of these symbolizes a note, and we have a sentence that we use and remember so that we can easily identify what those notes are, until over time you're able to just look at it, and just from the muscle memory you can identify it. But at the beginning stage, all that matters is that you remember the sentence themselves. So what is a sentence? For the lines, you have a different sentence than the spaces. So for the lines, it is every good boy deserves football. Now, if you've taken lessons in the past, this might ring a bell. If this is new to you, then don't worry. So what you're doing here is that you're taking the first letter of every word and you're mapping it out here. So this is the first word, so every, E. I'm going to put the E right there. Every. Then we have G. And this is on the lines, remember? Then we have B, then D, and then F. Now there are variations to this. Some people make their own up. This is just my one I use. I just happen to remember it. You can say every good boy deserves fun. It could be fruit. It could be fudge. It could be anything. So you're more than welcome to change this up. Just make sure you can actually remember it. So how can we actually use this now? If you find a note, let's say on the second line, that is going to be to G. If you have a note on the second to last line up here, that's going to be a D. You have an F up here, and so on. Now what about the spaces? What's the sentence for that? Well, the spaces is less of a sentence, actually more of a word. It is F-A-C-E, which spells out face. So I'm not going to need to, do the blue here because it's very self-explanatory. You put the F, the first letter, into the first space. Okay, we count the first, line or space from down, then upwards. So, this is very common in beginners. They think that the top one is actually number 1, but that's number 5. So this is the 5th line up here. So to count it very quickly, first line, second, third, fourth, fifth, and for the spaces, the first space, second, third, and fourth. Now, where do these fit in here? Well, you just take the first letter into the first space. So that's going to be F. We have A here. So second space, second letter, C, and then E. So F, A, C, E. And now you can get an idea for how these things link into the stave. If you happen to be writing or drawing this all out into your notebook or anything like that, 2 tips you have to remember. The first, don't worry too much about drawing the clef correctly. It is a bit of a strange symbol, but if you do want to draw it correctly, you take your pen or your pencil, you go clockwise, and then you go up, and then to the left, down, and do a flick like that. Again, it doesn't really matter if it's good or bad, because you as a piano player are not going to find yourself in many positions where you have to actually draw it. That's more for a composer who's writing pen and paper. The second thing is that you have to make sure, very, very sure, that if you're drawing any of these in, these circles, these notes, they must be very clearly either on the line or in the space. You want to avoid having something like this, where it's not exactly in the line and it's not exactly in the space. Thankfully, you're never going to see something like this in actual music because everything's printed out, in very much absolutes. But if you're drawing, to avoid confusion for yourself, make sure it's definitely on the line or on the space. So, this is all well and good, but how can we take this and actually play it on a piano? Well, that's where this clef comes in. When you have this clef, middle C, okay, so this is treble clef, middle C is actually over here. It's kind of got its own line here, its own small line. This line itself is called a ledger line, and it just means a line that's outside of the 5-line stave. When you're reading music, they want to play a particular note that's outside of this 5-line stave, so they would just make a small line here to indicate is it on a line or a space, because if this is the middle C, this would actually be the letter D. 1 note up, and that's clearly in a space. Okay, so like I mentioned, this here is middle C on the treble clef. And that's what I mean by clefs symbolize different places on the keyboard. If you imagine the full length of the piano, this captures a small part, and the clef indicates which section of the keyboard it's indicating. So as you're watching this video right now, play middle C. Right now, play middle C, and that is going to be this note over here. Which means that if you have a note over here, right, which is the first space, that has to be directly above middle C. So if you go to middle C and you count up to F, this is where that would be. The other thing, you'll notice that we have 2 C's. We have middle C here and we have a C up here. That is simply 1 octave above. So if I have a C over there and this distance here, that's going to be 8 notes because these are both the same C. So let's double check, right? This is going to be C, and we're going to have a D over here, right? The next note, and then E, which is the same over here, right? First line, and then F, G, A, B, C. So hopefully that makes a bit more sense now how everything is connected. These are not just kind of random notes that fit together somehow. These are actually 1 note apart. So actually what you're looking at here is the C major scale, right? C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now what if you wanted to play a C but an octave even higher? Well, again, this is where ledger lines come in, and hopefully this will make a bit more sense now. C, D, E, F, G. So G is going to be sitting right on the space here, right? We don't call this a line. We call that a space because it's not going through the line in the same way, for example, this B is, okay? Don't worry if you feel like you can't memorize this right now. We're going to have a separate exercise for that. just explaining how this works. So that's G. And then for A, I'm going to draw a line, and that would be A. Now, 2 notes above A is C. So actually, if I have 2 lines, that's going to be C. I know that might look like a bit of a jump because I'm just throwing all this at you, but this and the next few lessons, we're going to take this apart and do exercise together, so it's going to make a lot more sense. Again, I'm just showing you how all the mechanics fit together right now. So in a nutshell, that is how you identify what notes are in the right hand. So I'm going to show you how to remember all of this in a way that makes sense, and I'm going to quiz you on it to test your memory. And that's going to help with your learning tremendously. Okay, so it's a very common issue to have a lack of clarity for which sentence to remember, if it's going to be used for the lines or used for the spaces. So it's an incredibly simple way of memorizing it, which is just to check, does it have 5 letters or does it have 4? Because there are only 5 lines on the stave. So the sentence of face, or I say sentence, but you know what I mean. So saying face, F-A-C-E, it can't go on the lines because you only have 4 letters, F-A-C-E, and you're trying to fit them onto 5 lines. So that automatically, it can't go there. Now what about for every good boy deserves football? That, again, very simply, just goes up this way and it fits onto the lines. Now you just have to commit every good boy deserves football, or fun, fudge, fruit, whatever you want. Commit that to memory, okay? Make sure that you remember it and that you're not making mistakes about it. It would take you not even 30 seconds if you just wrote it down in your book, any scrap piece of paper, and wrote it all down, memorized it, turned it away, check yourself. It's a very simple thing. It's not like a 100-digit long number. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you some time now. So pause the video and make sure that you're comfortable with what I just taught, because now I'm going to give you a quiz where I'm just going to draw in a note. You're not only going to identify it, right? So saying it in your head, but you're also going to play the note on the piano. And that is going to strongly solidify what we're doing here. Now, if you're not yet generally comfortable with what I just taught, then either go back and watch it or take the quiz now and, it'll make more sense. So the first thing I'm going to give you is a nice and easy one, the first space. Okay, I'll give you a clue there. It is the first space. So your methodology here is to identify, is the note on a line or a space? Okay, so it's on a space. Automatically, we're not going to use every good boy deserves football. We're going to use the other one, right? So if you don't already know what that is right now, it is F, because the letters, the sentence we remember is F-A-C-E.